Fumi was a devoted member of her local church, a young woman of 26 who seemed to have everything going for her. She was known for her dedication to the church, always the first to arrive and the last to leave. Whether it was cleaning the sanctuary, organizing events, or leading the choir, Fumi was involved in every activity of the church. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and she inspired others with her unwavering commitment. The church members admired her, the elders respected her, and the pastor often praised her and used her as a point of reference for other young women to follow. But beneath her vibrant exterior, Fumi had a secret that no one in the church knew. While she was seen as the ideal Christian lady in the eyes of everyone, there was a part of her life that she kept hidden from others. Fumi had been initiated into a secret cult during her teenage years, a group that practiced human rituals and worshipped a powerful goddess. This society had given her supernatural abilities, which she had used to help others in the church. Whether it was praying for the sick or giving advice that seemed to come from divine inspiration, Fumi's powers made her even more revered. The secret society's influence on Fumi was deep, but she never allowed it to interfere with her church activities. In fact, she justified her involvement by telling herself that the power she gained were being used for God. But the truth was that she was trapped. The goddess of the secret society had made it clear that Fumi belonged to her and that there would be dire consequences if she ever tried to break free. Despite the heavy burden she carried, Fumi continued to live her life as if nothing was wrong. Her secret was safe, and as long as she followed the rules of the secret society, she could continue to enjoy the respect and admiration of her church family. But deep down, Fumi knew that she was living a double life, and the fear of subsequent consequences often made her sick. As time passed, Fumi began to long for a normal life. She wanted to get married, have a family, and live a life free from the dark secrets that haunted her. But she knew that the goddess would never allow her to leave the secret society, and that any attempt to do so would mean she would have to face severe punishment. Life took an unexpected turn for Fumi when she met Bayo, a young man who worked for a prestigious company in Lagos. Bayo was everything Fumi had ever wanted in a husband: kind, handsome, successful, and very spiritual. They met at a church conference in Ibadan, where Bayo was invited to speak. Fumi had been asked to lead the choir, and her performance had left a lasting impression on Bayo. After the conference, he made sure he got to know her better. Bayo was immediately drawn to Fumi's vibrant personality, and her deep commitment to the church was also a strong point for him. He admired her passion for service and her strong faith. As they spent time together, Bayo fell in love with her. He was convinced that Fumi was the woman he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. After months of getting to know each other, Bayo proposed to Fumi, and she accepted. The news of Fumi's engagement spread quickly through the church. The congregation was thrilled, and the pastor was overjoyed. Everyone agreed that Bayo was the perfect match for Fumi. The church began to make plans for a grand wedding, and Fumi found herself at the center of attention. But while the church was celebrating, Fumi was filled with fear. She knew that her engagement would not be welcomed by the goddess of the secret society. The rules of the society were clear. Members were not allowed to marry outside of the group. If they did, they would face severe consequences. Fumi tried to push these thoughts out of her mind, but the fear lingered. She knew that the goddess would not let her go, not without a fight. As the wedding was approaching, Fumi tried to act unbothered. She got busy with the planning, choosing the venue, the decorations, and the dress with so much enthusiasm. But at night, when she was alone, she would be afraid. Her thoughts would go to the secret society and the goddess's warning. The closer the wedding day came, the more Fumi's fear grew. She knew that she was going against everything she had agreed to do under oath, and she dreaded what might happen to her as a result of that. A few weeks before the wedding, Fumi had a dream that shook her to the core. In the dream, she found herself standing in a dark, misty forest. The trees loomed over her like twisted shadows, but there was deep silence. Suddenly, the goddess appeared before her, a beautifully dressed figure engulfed in a dark smoke. The goddess's eyes glowed with an unusual light as she spoke. "You dare defy me, Fumi," the goddess hissed, her voice echoing through the forest. "You think you can leave me, marry this man, and live a normal life? You belong to me, and I will not allow you to break our bond." Fumi tried to speak, but her voice was caught in her throat. The goddess moved closer, her presence suffocating. "If you go through with this marriage, I will make you regret it. On your wedding day, you will pay the price for your defiance. You will never know peace." Fumi woke up in a cold sweat, her heart pounding in her chest. The dream had felt so real, and she knew it was not just a figment of her imagination. It was a warning from the goddess, a reminder of the power she still held over Fumi's life. The fear that had been gnawing at Fumi's mind now consumed her. She was terrified of what might happen if she went through with the wedding. For days, Fumi wrestled with the decision. She loved Bayo and wanted to marry him, but the thought of defying the goddess filled her with fear. She considered calling off the wedding, but the thought of disappointing Bayo and the church made her sick in her stomach. How could she explain her fear without revealing her secret? How could she tell Bayo that she was part of a secret society and that her life was in danger because of it? The pressure became too much for Fumi to bear. She found herself withdrawing from the wedding preparations, avoiding conversations about the future. Bayo noticed the change in her attitude, but attributed it to pre-wedding jitters. He reassured her, telling her that everything would be fine once they were married. But Fumi knew that nothing would ever be fine again. The day of the wedding arrived, and the church was abuzz with excitement. Guests from all over the city had come to witness the union of Fumi and Bayo. The church was beautifully decorated with flowers and ribbons, and the choir sang hymns of joy as the guests took their seats. Fumi, dressed in a stunning white wedding gown, stood in front of the mirror in the bridal room, trying to calm her nerves. But as the minutes ticked by, the fear that had been building inside her reached its peak. She could feel the presence of the goddess lurking in the shadows, waiting for the moment to strike. Fumi tried to push the fear aside, telling herself that everything would be fine. But deep down, she knew that the goddess would not let her escape so easily. As the ceremony began, Fumi walked down the aisle, her heart pounding in her chest. Bayo stood at the altar, smiling as she approached. The pastor began the ceremony, reciting the vows that would bind them together. But as Fumi repeated the words, she felt a strange sensation in her body. It started as a tingling in her fingers and toes, but it quickly spread, turning into a sharp burning pain. Before we continue our story, hit the subscribe button right now, please, and turn on post notifications so that whenever we make a post, you'll be the first to get notified. Please subscribe before we continue our story. Have you subscribed? Let's continue. Fumi's eyes widened in horror as she looked down at her hands. Her fingers were elongating and twisting at the same time. The skin on her arms began to ripple, as if something was moving beneath the surface. She gasped, trying to speak, but no words came out. The pain intensified, and she doubled over and fell to the ground. The guests watched in shock as Fumi's body began to change. Her arms and legs twisted and coiled, her skin turning a sickly green. Her face elongated into a snot, and her eyes had a blue glow. The pastor stepped back in fear, dropping the Bible as he watched Fumi transform before his eyes. The church started screaming as Fumi's transformation was complete. She had turned into a snake, her long, scaly body coiled on the floor. The guests panicked, fleeing the church in fear. Bayo stood frozen, unable to comprehend what had just happened. The pastor was in shock, unable to believe that the vibrant young woman who had been so loved by the church had turned into a snake. The news of Fumi, the church girl who transformed into a snake, spread like wildfire. The church was thrown into chaos. The wedding was cancelled, and Bayo was devastated. He had gone into hiding, unable to face the reality of what had just occurred. The church elders convened an emergency meeting to discuss the situation, but no one had answers. The local pastor, who had always admired Fumi for her dedication and enthusiasm, was deeply troubled. He couldn't understand how someone so devoted to the church could have fallen into such darkness. The congregation was in an uproar, and many members began to question their faith. How could God allow something so terrible to happen in their midst to one of their devoted members? Fumi, now a snake, crawled back to her home, her mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. She was still aware of what was going on and was aware of her body, but her body was no longer her own. The goddess had kept her promise. Fumi had paid the price for her defiance. She was trapped in a form that reflected the darkness that had been hidden within her for so long. As she lay coiled on the floor of her room, Fumi wept. She had lost everything: her fiancé, her friends, her place in the church. She was alone, a prisoner of her own choices. Her body imprisoned in the body of a snake. The goddess's words echoed in her mind, a constant reminder of the power she held over Fumi's life. Days passed, and Fumi's despair deepened. She was still trapped in the body of a snake. She didn't know how to escape the curse that had been placed upon her. She didn't know if it was possible. But as the days turned into weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope. She remembered the words of the general overseer, who had once preached about the power of confession and repentance. Perhaps, if she could find a way to confess her sins and seek forgiveness, she could be freed from the curse and can turn back into a human being. Everyone who had attended the wedding was in a state of disbelief and fear. The once vibrant and beloved Fumi had become the subject of gossip. People wondered what could have caused such a terrifying event, but no one knew the truth except Fumi. The church leaders, still shaken by the incident, convened another meeting, and in the meeting, they decided to inform the general overseer of the church, hoping that he would have some answers as their spiritual superior. Meanwhile, Fumi's parents were devastated. They had lost their daughter in the most horrifying way. They couldn't bring themselves to leave their home. They were afraid of judgmental stares and the whispers of their neighbors. They prayed desperately for their daughter and prayed for her return, hoping against hope that she could be saved from whatever had befallen her. In the weeks following the wedding, the general overseer arrived in town. He was a stern man, known for his deep knowledge of spiritual matters. He listened carefully as the pastors and elders recounted the events of the wedding. He knew that something was wrong and that the forces of darkness were responsible for what had just happened, and he was determined to uncover the truth. The general overseer, accompanied by the pastor and church elders, decided to visit Fumi's home. They arrived at the house to find it very quiet. This was a once lively home, but now it was silent. Fumi's parents greeted them at the door with worried faces. As they entered the house, they noticed strange markings on the floor, leading to Fumi's room. The general overseer immediately recognized them as signs of dark magic. He instructed the pastor and elders to begin to pray, knowing that they were dealing with something far beyond their understanding. Fumi, still trapped in the snake body, was curled up in a corner of her bedroom. She hissed softly as the men entered, her eyes filled with mix of fear and anger. The general overseer approached her cautiously. His Bible was in his hand. He began to pray, his voice strong and commanding, calling on the power of God. to break the dark hold over Fumi. As he prayed, Fumi's body began to tremble. The markings on the floor glowed with an eerie light, and the room filled with a cold, unnatural wind. The general overseer continued to pray. His voice was strong. Fumi's snake body began to recede. Her scales fell away, revealing her human skin underneath, and her limbs straightened out. After what felt like an eternity, Fumi was fully restored to her human form. She lay on the floor, weak and trembling, but she was herself again. The general overseer, exhausted but relieved, knelt beside her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You are free now, Fumi," he said gently, "but you must confess your sins and renounce the darkness that has held you captive." Fumi wept as she began to confess her dark secret to the elders. "I was initiated into this secret society when I was just a little girl," she began, her voice trembling. "It started as a game, but as I grew older, I realized I was trapped. The goddess gave me powers I used to help others, but at a terrible cost. I was forbidden to love, to marry anyone of my choice. I thought I could escape, but the goddess warned me. I didn't listen." The room was silent as Fumi continued, her tears flowing freely. The pastors and elders listened in stunned silence, unable to comprehend the depth of her involvement in the dark arts. "I knew it was wrong," Fumi said, her voice breaking, "but I didn't know how to get out. I thought if I just ignored the goddess, I could live a normal life. But she was always there, watching, waiting." The general overseer nodded solemnly. "The forces of darkness are cunning and deceptive," he said, "but you have taken the first step by confessing. Now, you must renounce these powers and sever all your ties with the secret society." With the guidance of the general overseer, Fumi renounced the goddess and the secret society. The pastor and elders joined hands in prayer, calling on God to cleanse Fumi of all the evil that had taken hold of her life. The battle for Fumi's soul was not yet over. As the prayers continued, the room was suddenly filled with a chilling presence. The temperature dropped, and the light flickered. The goddess, enraged by Fumi's betrayal, had come to reclaim her. A cold wind swept through the room, and the walls seemed to close in on them. Fumi screamed as she felt the dark force pulling her, trying to drag her back into the abyss. The general overseer, undeterred, stood firm, his voice rising above the chaos. "In the name of Jesus, I command you to leave this child of God," he shouted, holding up his Bible. The pastors and elders echoed prayers, their voices growing stronger as they fought against the evil presence. The goddess shrieked in fury, her powers waning as the prayers intensified. Fumi's body convulsed, and she cried out in pain. But the general overseer did not relent. He continued to pray, his faith unshakable, and slowly the dark presence began to recede. The air grew warmer, and the light stopped flickering. Finally, with one last cry of defiance, the goddess was banished. The room fell silent, and Fumi was on the floor, exhausted but free. The general overseer knelt beside her again, with a look of relief on his face. "It is over, Fumi," he said softly. "You are free." In the days that followed, Fumi slowly began to rebuild her life. The church rallied around her, supported her as she healed from her ordeal. The general overseer stayed back in town for several weeks, guiding Fumi through her spiritual recovery and ensuring that she was truly free from the grip of the dark forces. Fumi's transformation was not just physical, but spiritual as well. She became a new person. Her faith grew stronger than ever. She was no longer the vibrant, outwardly perfect young woman who hid a dark secret. Now, she was a humble servant of God, grateful for the second chance at life. The church held a special service to celebrate Fumi's deliverance. The congregation rejoiced at the power of God's mercy and grace. Fumi stood head bowed with tears of gratitude in her eyes. She thanked the pastor, the elders, and the general overseer for their unwavering support and for helping her find her way back to the light. As for Bayo, he had been deeply affected by the event of the wedding day. After much prayer and reflection, he decided to stand by Fumi. They took things slowly, allowing time for healing and growth. With the blessings of the church and their families, they eventually rekindled their relationship, this time built on a foundation of honesty and faith. Fumi's story became a powerful testimony within the church and beyond. She spoke openly about her past, warning others of the dangers of dabbling into the occult. Her life, once marked by darkness and secrecy, was now a beacon of hope and redemption. In the end, Fumi's wedding day had been the turning point of her life, but not in the way anyone had expected. It was the day she shared her old life and embraced a new beginning, one filled with light, love, and faith in the power of God. All right. So, what did you learn from this story? Share it in the comment section. And please subscribe to this channel right now and turn on post notification so that whenever a story is posted, you'll be the first to get notified and you'll be the first to watch. Like and share this. Don't forget to drop your lessons in the comment section. Subscribe and see you in our next story. Bye bye.